The killings that happened day after day after day after day in Gaza, in full knowledge, the world's knowledge, that women and children were being killed in large numbers, shamelessly and supported by the United States, that this is going to count as a landmark in the moral history of humanity. Anti-Semitism is definitely on the rise. There have been some horrifying incidents and more of them. I attribute that rise of anti-Semitism in part to the attitude of the Trump administration, just basically letting the lizards out from under the rocks.
2 years ago, students at Columbia University started a protest and an encampment against the war in Gaza. They demanded their university's divestment from companies tied to the Israeli war. Over the following weeks, Columbia University authorized NYPD to clear the encampment. This led to the arrest of almost 100 students, followed by disciplinary action. As protests and encampments followed around the country, so did police violence and disciplinary action. Today, I'm sitting with Bruce Robbins to discuss these questions. He's a professor at Columbia and was among many faculty around the country who supported the students' right to protest. This year, Bruce published a book titled "Who's Allowed to Protest?" In the book, he discusses student activism and the accusations against them, including that they were just a bunch of privileged kids stirring trouble. Take a listen.
Last week was supposed to be devoted to Gaza. I had not said Gaza what was or wasn't an atrocity. I had not assigned any readings. I had told the students, of course, we had talked about Gaza because you can't be teaching atrocity and not talk about genocide in real time, so of course it came up, but I had not assigned any readings initially, and I asked the students to recommend what readings they thought would be good for their fellow classmates to read. And on the day when we were supposed to talk about Gaza, it turned out that there was an encampment that had just been set up really just across the way. And I told the students, I think we have a historic opportunity here. Our subject today is atrocity in Gaza, and this encampment is there to protest atrocity in Gaza. So as far as I'm concerned, we should wander over there and have some conversation with the people on the encampment and, about what's going on. But I understand that not everyone is going to feel comfortable doing this. So anybody who doesn't feel comfortable, please don't come. There will be no consequences for you, of course. This is not part of the plan. It really just came about because of this opportunity, this accident. So some students came and other students didn't come. And we had some conversation. It turned out it was filmed. I did not remember this until a journalist from The Guardian wrote to me and said, by the way, I filmed you at the encampment. Do you want the footage? And I said, sure. Anyway, so we had some conversation, and I think it was two students who did not feel comfortable coming to the encampment, who didn't come to the encampment, who then brought charges against me. The long story is that I was told that there were charges. I got a lawyer. There was a hearing. There was no judgment. Time went by. I asked them what's going on. And they said, actually, there are new charges against you, so we'll have to have another hearing. Months went by. And finally, there was a judgment, and I was found guilty of violating the equality of opportunity to get an education of those students who had not come to that class. This is on the basis of Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. The Trump administration's understanding of Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act is that if you discriminate against someone on the basis of their national origin, you are violating their civil rights, and that is the case for Israelis, since Israelis serve in the IDF. Anything that is said about the IDF or about Israeli military behavior is discrimination against Israelis, so I was found guilty. Anyway, that is not really fascinating. It didn't lead to a very severe punishment. My punishment was really a slap on the wrist. I was told to have a 15-minute conversation with the Dean of the Humanities, which I had, and then an hour and a half training with a lawyer who had been hired for this purpose by the university, and who said, look, I'm just here to teach you how not to violate Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act again. And I told her, it is extremely unlikely that I will be in the same situation again, since the coincidence here was that I was teaching a class on atrocity in Gaza on the day when there was an encampment protesting atrocity in Gaza, and that's why I took students to the encampment. I didn't have anything to do with the encampment otherwise. I mean, I was in sympathy with the encampment, but that I didn't say that to her, and that was not relevant to the charges against me. Anyway, so that's for me. They didn't try to throw me out, as they did, in fact, try to throw other people out. The story of the encampment is a much more interesting story, and I don't have privileged information about it. My understanding is that students had tried to get the administration of Colombia to talk about divesting from the Israeli military and companies that benefit from the occupation. And the administration had stonewalled and had said, we are not going to talk to you about that, which is very strange given that they actually had talked with previous demonstrators who had asked for divestment. For example, from apartheid South Africa, where they in fact did divest, and from fossil fuel companies responsible for climate change. Again, there was a long discussion. For some reason, there was an absolute refusal to talk about what the students were asking. And it was when the students hit a stone wall that they decided they had to do something a little bit more public, I don't know, than just ask the administration for conversation. And that's when the first encampment happened. It was cleared out by the police. Many students were arrested. Other students created a second encampment. Anyway, this is, people either know the story, or if they're interested, they can check it in the media. Not that the media was extremely sympathetic to the students, but anyway, the story has been told many, many times. So that's at least the quick version.
So you were involved with not only at this time but before that as well with the AUP, the American Association of University Professors, and of course with all the work that the AUP has in relation to academic freedom. So how do you see what happened in the encampment at Columbia, but also around the country, in the light of these questions related to academic freedom?
I don't want to evade your question, but I will say that to me, the issue is much larger than academic freedom. That is, I think the killings that happened day after day after day after day in Gaza, in full knowledge, the world's knowledge, that women and children were being killed in large numbers, shamelessly and supported by the United States, that this is going to count as a landmark in the moral history of humanity. I think people around the world were so horrified by this. And the killings that happened on October 7th of which I disapprove strongly, were clearly not an adequate excuse for what was happening day after day after day, a completely disproportionate response, however you feel about the attacks of October 7th. And I think this was clear pretty much to everybody, except Israel's fanatical supporters, of whom there are now fewer, because I think Israel lost a great deal of the kind of loose moral sympathy, what was left of its moral sympathy, which, after all, it has carried because of the Holocaust, and it has played that card very strongly. But in a way, it's not just a card. I've been thinking very seriously about the work of Edward Said, who was my colleague and was a friend, and has been an enormous influence. This is way beyond the AUP and academic freedom. Edward Said's position on the cause of the Palestinians is that it is not a banal case of settler colonialism like Algeria or like other cases of settler colonialism. We Palestinians are the victims of victims. So he took it actually quite seriously that, the Holocaust still lingered in people's minds and affected their moral judgment. And I think he was right. Of course, this is 25 years ago, but still. Whatever moral credit Israel has accumulated because of sympathy for the victims of the Holocaust, I think it is now frittered away by what it has done in Gaza, and for that matter, on the West Bank, since it has taken advantage of the fact that the world's attention has been largely focused on Gaza to do more unspeakable things on the West Bank. So this, I'm sorry, it's not to downplay the importance of the AUP and its fight for academic freedom, but it's bigger than that. I mean, I think that this is going to go down in history. Now, the AUP, I think you probably know better than I do, had tried to stay out of the business of boycotts and divestment and sanctions. It is, an organization that has defended academic freedom from all sides. And it seems to me that the shift in the AAUP's position, where it is now realizing that the historical seriousness of the situation that it is dealing with is such that it has got to support people who are being stigmatized and punished and arrested, suspended, and so on for their support of the Palestinian cause and the support for BDS, for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. That this has become, I think it redounds to the credit of the AUP that it has decided that it cannot live up to its own principles unless it defends people who are asking for divestment, for example. So I've been very, very proud of the AUP and proud of its being so proactive on these issues. I mean, I'm trying to send my mind back to this is now more than 2 years ago, but when the university was not even mentioning students who had been arrested by ICE and were threatened with deportation, had been sent off to various facilities, which, by the way, Columbia has been invested in. Not saying in a conspiratorial sort of way that it might have protective feelings toward facilities that are run by a company in which Columbia has been invested. But in any case, Columbia has not said word one in defense of students who were threatened with deportation. The AAUP has not let those cases go unremarked. There was an AAUP vigil every Monday at noon on behalf of Mahmoud Khalil, for example. I mean, every Monday. And there were dozens and dozens of people. I mean, that's one of many, many things. There were demonstrations. There was a faculty walkout in which I participated. The AUP has really stood up in a big way, saying that basically, I mean, the logic, I think, is what is the use of academic freedom if we don't defend people who are being targeted because of their own defense of Palestinian rights?
These are really, I want to stay with this point, what you were just describing in relation to the magnitude of what happened in Gaza. And now, I come from Egypt, I come from the region, and obviously the devastation that happened has probably changed the entire region for the foreseeable future, and has created some irreparable damage to any hopes for, some kind of a peaceful resolution right now. And there's a lot of people who are working on this, and it also has created significant changes, if you will, on the domestic politics in the U.S. That this is also a key moment in the history of the U.S. and its domestic politics. How do you see the impact of the Gaza war on U.S. domestic politics and on the Palestine question in U.S. domestic politics?
I will try to answer that question, but first I want to put you on the spot. It seems to me that Egypt has probably been subject to serious diplomatic pressure to basically get rid of the Palestinian population of Gaza, because I think that that's basically what the Israeli policy has been, to make life in Gaza unlivable, and people that it can't kill just chase away by making conditions there, unlivable. And from the outside, I say this, and that's why I say it's a question for you. It seems to me that Egypt has shown some backbone in not going along with the American plans to, let the Palestinian population of Gaza be settled somewhere else, supposedly temporarily, but in fact, everybody knows that once they get rid of the population of Gaza, Kushner goes in and creates beachfront properties, and those people would never be allowed back. So can I just turn the question back on you and say, how do you see the Egyptian reaction to this American pressure, what I imagine is American pressure?
I think the Egyptian regime in general before the war on Gaza, has been participating in a larger policy that the Israeli government has implemented to blockade the Gaza Strip. And, as you know, and as a lot of people who are listening to us know, there has been an ongoing humanitarian crisis in Gaza for years and years before the war. There was shortage of food, of supplies, water, medicine, etc. And the Egyptian regime has been part of it. And even after the war started, they have still continued to be, let's say, extremely hesitant, if you will, to allow for supplies, to allow for humanitarian support, etc., to the population that is being devastated under the war. All that said, for the regime in Egypt, I think out of pure political survival skill, they understood that the movement of Palestinians in Egypt and participating in Trump-Netanyahu plan to displace the population of Gaza would cause significant backlash domestically. Again, this is domestically speaking, the people in Egypt were very much, obviously, very, very much supportive of Palestinian rights for a very, very long time. And so I think for the regime, this was a red line that they could not cross, that this is just not, they would not be able to survive the kind of the political ramifications of something like this. So I think that was primarily one of the key reasons why they were able to resist this type of pressure that continued.
That makes perfect. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and again, the pressure, it was a political pressure. One would imagine there was also a lot of kind of bribes, if you will. Egypt is in a very, very tough situation in terms of economically. There's an ongoing financial crisis, rampant inflation, devaluation of the currency, and one would imagine that the American and Israeli pressure probably came with also, carrots, if you will, to try to do
I would
that.
be very surprised if it did not come with carrots. Look, I didn't ask the question as a fan of the Sisi regime.
I didn't think you would be. No.
But you have to permit me to be a little bit pleased to see them responsive to democratic pressure.
Absolutely.
That the pressure of the Egyptian people is strong enough so that this became a red line for them, in spite of the pressure, diplomatic and financial and so on, to do what, the Americans and the Israelis wanted. So
absolutely. Yeah.
Credit where credit is due. It's a very imperfect world that we live in. Mm-hmm. And every time something is there to be appreciated, you have to appreciate it. Otherwise, you go to bed at night feeling very unhappy.
Absolutely. And it is a win in that sense. The idea that a pressure allows for the pressure in Egypt, in Jordan as well, and really in many other parts around the world, that just put a stop to this plan. It's a huge win.
Yeah. I have nothing intelligent to say about what the likely consequences of the crazy people being in charge of putting Gaza back together again. What is going to come out of that? I can't even imagine. None of it seems even worth talking about. But anyway, within that situation, at least they didn't manage to kick out 2 million people and ship them off to to Egypt or to Jordan or wherever they wanted to ship them off to. And that's a win. It's persistence.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, to go back to your original question, I do think that this whole story has had a lot of impact on domestic politics in the U.S. It's very hard to be precise about it, although I have seen various polls suggesting that disgust with the Democratic Party's support for the Israelis in Gaza was one of the reasons why Kamala Harris lost. And, people some of the sort of mainstream Democrats were poo-pooing that. But again and again and again, there would be polls that suggested that people either stayed home or even voted for Trump. Just because, Trump, at a certain point, it seems unthinkable now, had run as someone who was not in favor of military adventures, right? Or the supporting of military adventures. And the Democratic Party, this goes back to Hillary Clinton. One of the reasons why Clinton lost, I think, was that she was a bit of a hawk, militarily speaking. Anyway, so a reason why Kamala Harris lost, but also a reason why there has been a kind of efflorescence of progressive alternatives around the country. Obviously, we have a pro-Palestinian mayor here in New York, which is, that together with the New York Knicks, I hope I'm not providing a certain timing signature for our conversation. But miracles happen in our time. One of them was Zohran Mamdani getting elected. The other one I won't mention because it's not over yet, but we shall see. So yeah, I think a lot of people, progressive candidates around the country have been emboldened both by Zohran's victory, granted in New York City, and by disgust with the mainstream Democratic Party, with all these people who are being funded by AIPAC. I mean, you see people who basically have never really been critical of Israel are saying, I may have taken money from AIPAC in the past, but I'm not taking it now. I disapprove. That was unthinkable 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. Absolutely unthinkable. So, I see a sea change. And, there are obviously domestic economic issues, which are also very important. And the clownish behavior of the Republicans in power. But I do think that, Gaza and U.S. support for Gaza has been a major factor in opening the doors to more progressive candidates around the country.
So do you think for many years people talked about progressive except for Palestine do you think we're done with this at this point?
That would be foolishly optimistic on my part to say that we're done with it. I think a lot will depend on what happens, in the next election cycles, exactly what we see. But it certainly is not riding high. It's not a respectable position for large numbers of people the way it used to be. Not at all. I mean, there are people who are, even if it's only lip service, but, lip service is something also. Mm-hmm. I really think that the Israelis have overplayed their hand and they have lost a lot of support. And maybe it's just my hope, but we'll see. I think that it will turn out that they've lost even more.
This is a really very, very important. And there are a number of things that I want to ask about. But first, I want to stay with the question that's coming from the Trump administration, but also earlier than this, actually, from the Biden administration about Title VI. And there are a lot of questions in U.S. universities about anti-Semitism, which is undeniably on the rise, but also about the weaponization of the investigative process of all of these measures that universities take. So what are your thoughts on this, especially that you went through the process essentially yourself as well? So what are your thoughts on this?
My main thought is, on the one hand, yes, anti-Semitism is definitely on the rise. There have been some horrifying incidents and more of them. I attribute that rise of anti-Semitism in part to the attitude of the Trump administration, just basically letting the lizards out from under the rocks, making it, palatable to express things that people might have felt before, but they wouldn't express. They would be ashamed to express. But the most important factor seems to me, this seems just self-evident, what's happened in Gaza and what the Israelis have been doing. The fact that the images of the violence have been available uncurated on social media. So, no chance for the usual gatekeepers, of television and the newspapers to really control the flow of information the way they did in the past. And, the anger at the Israelis and the anger at the Jews who support what the Israelis are doing, it's not a surprise that anger should find some outlets. I'll get to the weaponization of the issue. Of course, I do have feelings about that. But before I do, so I traveled in Europe some as a student during the Vietnam War. And to no one's great surprise, there was considerable anti-American feeling around the world, certainly in various European countries. I didn't go around with a flag. I mean, maybe I wouldn't have anyway. But it could not be a surprise to anybody that there was anti-American feeling at a time when tens and even hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese civilians were being butchered by bombardment from above. And the world could see it. So anti-American feeling, it was not some kind of racism. It was not some sort of crazy, irrational thing. It was a kind of more or less rational response to what America was associated with in the world. And I think that the rise of anti-Semitism, disgusting as I find it and threatening to me and my daughter, my granddaughter, still, it makes sense given what the Israelis have been doing and given the support on the whole that the American Jewish community has offered to it. Much less than would have been the case, in previous years, but still there and, visible. Anyway, weaponization. One of the first actions that the Columbia administration took, this is before the encampments, was, well, first of all, to suspend Jewish Voice for Peace on a technicality. You demonstrated 13 feet to the left of the place you were supposed to, or 44 minutes before, they just wanted to stop Jewish demonstrators against Israel. And, if you didn't know which way the wind was blowing when they suspended Jewish Voice for Peace, you should have been able to figure it out. Then they formed a task force on anti-Semitism. And the task force on anti-Semitism was a joke, a very, very bad joke. First of all, the three heads of it were notoriously fanatical Zionists. Now, there were people on the Columbia campus who actually know something about anti-Semitism, about its history, about its causes, because it has causes, that historical causes, kind of like what I was just saying about recent causes, namely the violence in Gaza. But there have always been causes. And if you look with some kind of rationality, not as a Zionist propagandist, you don't say, they will always hate us, therefore everything that we do is justified because hatred of Jews is eternal and inexplicable. You look for reasons. And if you want to understand anti-Semitism on campus or anywhere else, you bring in people who know something about that. For example, the historian Mark Mazauer, history department of Columbia, who has just published a book on anti-Semitism, an excellent book. Was he asked to be involved on the task force on anti-Semitism? He was not. It was only fanatic supporters of Israel, who then did such a parody of serious journalistic work, that is, going around asking people, have you been the victim of anti-Semitism? Yes, yes, yes. When I hear them chanted, it makes me feel so unsafe. Now, that's not anti-Semitism, and it doesn't make anybody unsafe. But the report, there were various reports by the Task Force on Anti-Semitism, made it seem as if people were being stabbed, beaten with clubs, and in fact, almost all of I think there was one chain that was jerked off somebody, but probably off campus. Anyway, there was no violence. There was nothing but, I feel so unsafe. I feel so unsafe. There are all these people who are so critical of Israel. I'm just very unsafe. Mommy. It was embarrassing. It was embarrassing, I think, for the kids who testified to being victims of anti-Semitism. It was more embarrassing for the grown-ups who really were being asked in their journalistic and scholarly capacity to judge whether there was anti-Semitism on campus. The answer to that was no. The Trump administration wanted evidence of anti-Semitism on campus. That has been its line all the way through. The task force couldn't really find any, but it pretended to. And the conclusions drawn by the administration is, look, there's so much anti-Semitism, we have to do more. We must do more. And that, blatantly an attempt to please the Republicans for whatever reasons. in Congress and in the Trump administration.
So, and at the same time, I think you're raising an important point, which is we're not saying, or the argument is that there is no anti-Semitism, but that there is ways of understanding what is the nature of anti-Semitism, how to make Jewish students and Jewish faculty feel safe and protected in the university. That's different from basically just submitting to what the Trump administration is saying.
Well, all right. So I did not sound very respectful just now of the feelings of insecurity expressed by people on the Columbia campus. The truth is, I am not very respectful of those feelings. I think, people really need better evidence that those feelings are justified before they can, make a point about not feeling safe. I will go down a limb here and say, yes, there has been a lot of anti-Semitism in the United States and horrifying episodes of it in various places, not on Columbia's campus. Mm-hmm. There was none of that anywhere near the encampments. Many of the people participating in the encampments were Jews, right? A very high percentage, I would say. As I hope everybody knows who cares, a Passover Seder was celebrated on the encampment. So Muslim students and Jewish students really had each other's backs in a way that gives me chills thinking about it. I saw it. So the one place where I would say there was no anti-Semitism was on the Columbia campus. In lots of other places, sure, but not there. Mm-hmm. And that just needs to be said.
I want to go back to the question of protest and go back to your book. And in the book, you link the attacks on protests with a strand of thinking on the right that you describe or that we can describe as anti-elitism and anti-intellectualism. So tell us a little bit about this. Why do you think, or how does this anti-elitism and anti-intellectualism come from, and how is it similar or different from what one would describe as populism, for example? That's also part and parcel of, political discussions on both right and left.
Yeah. So this book, is anybody going to see this, or they're just going to hear it?
They're going to see it too.
Oh, well, here, everybody.
But we will also put, we will also put it in here. Yes, of course. Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, I wrote this book, Who's Allowed to Protest, out of indignation at some of the immediate reactions to the Columbia encampments. The immediate reaction to the Columbia encampments that pushed my buttons were something like, why do we have to listen to these privileged brats, at an elite school? Who are they, right? They're just doing it to score moral points for themselves, maybe to further their careers. Everybody is self-interested if you're cynical enough. So they're just being, trying to show that they're morally superior to other people. Privileged. Now, that drove me up the wall because it was in bad faith, because these are people who don't object to privilege in the really important sense, which is monetary privilege of, the party that they're supporting. But it also drove me up the wall because it was not entirely false. Mm-hmm. That is to say, the kids in the encampment, should I not call them the kids? I think of them as the kids. I'm old enough. I'm allowed, I think. Anyway, they did a survey of the kids their fellow classmates who actually got arrested. And it was amazing how many of those people were extremely economically vulnerable, often from countries of what we used to be called the third world, right? Whose parents didn't have all the capital, or the cultural capital or financial capital, who had invested a lot in getting their kids to a place like Columbia. And the kids knew that they were putting this at risk. So they were taking, I mean, there was a certain bravery, there was a certain standing up for principle on the part of quite a large number of the people who were actually involved in the encampment. But the people who were involved in the encampment were super conscious that in some ways they really are privileged. And that was very interesting to me. I mean, I teach at Columbia. I am a privileged person. My parents didn't go to college. I know the difference between, people who would never have thought of going to college and me now having gone to college, having gotten a master's, having gotten a doctorate, teaching at a place like Columbia. Yes, I'm privileged too. So I wanted to make a case that having a certain amount of privilege should not disqualify people who are critics of things that deserve to be criticized. So there's a certain amount of wrestling with myself that went on. I mean, there's a simple line of argument, which is, that when the anti-elitism of the Republicans, which has been very successful, has created a systematic confusion between people who have education and people who have money, that there's not the same thing. There are a lot of people, you know this as well as I, who have some education and don't have any money at all. And they're very, very precarious. They're having trouble making rent. It's not as if getting a BA, even from a good school, guarantees, a good and meaningful life with benefits. So it's a huge confusion between, let's say, the Ellisons, who have an enormous amount of money and an enormous amount of power, and that the Republicans are not complaining about, and students at an Ivy League school who may or may not have more than the average amount of money, but they have education and they can whip up feelings on the part of lots of people against the elite, when it should be against the Ellisons and it should not be against the people simply who are trying to get a BA. So that's the quick version of the book.
And I think it's really important to understand the difference between these two, sorts of privilege. And you do talk about, you do introduce a class analysis that's also historical, because you're making the argument in the book that these accusations are not new. They have been around for a long time. You yourself was part of previous protest movements. So can you just, tell us a little bit about this long history of accusations of elitism or privilege that the right has levied against protest movements?
Well, I mean, generationally, I suppose I have access to some experience, because this is the kind of thing that was used, on the protesters of my generation. Call it the Vietnam War generation. It was probably a little more psychologized than sociologized for my generation. That is, we were told that we were in an Oedipal battle with our parents, and we didn't really care about the people of Vietnam. What were the people of Vietnam to us? We were just in the middle of a psychodrama with our parents, or possibly trying to pretend that we were doing something as meaningful as fighting World War II. I mean, that was another one of the lines. But to some extent, there was a sociologizing. I mean, I talk about the Tom Wolfe essay, Radical Chic, which came out in 1970, and which was, exactly, it was the greatest literary example of this particular style of right-wing backlash. The occasion was a meeting, a fundraiser in the very, very luxurious apartment of the musician, conductor, composer Leonard Bernstein, on behalf of the Black Panthers, who were up on charges in New Haven, charges which were eventually dropped. So paying for the legal fees of the Black Panthers was clearly a good thing to do at the time. But Tom Wolfe mocked the people eating canapes brought around on trays by waiters in a 13-room duplex, and tried to mock the whole enterprise of any kind of solidarity between these people and the people that they were trying to defend. And my little tiny bit of sociological analysis, I mean, I should remind myself, maybe there's more, but what I remember is the examples that Wolfe was choosing were people exactly like Leonard Bernstein, who had reached the cultural eminence that they had reached by dint of talent and hard work, and not by making fortunes in the railroads or the mines or whatever, or certainly not by inheriting fortunes the way Carnegies and Rockefellers and so on did. So there was a certain defense of old money against new money, where the new money was granted, kind of more meritocratic and less a matter of inheritance and the not really very, very savory industrial means by which large fortunes were accumulated in previous generations. I'm not sure that's exactly what you meant when you said that there was class analysis. Probably not.
No, I think that's exactly it, and that there is a kind of, as you just said, a defense of old money, a defense of money that is acquired through either through inheritance or through running mass corporations. Nobody is accusing Elon Musk of being an elitist, interestingly.
Right.
I
mean, it sounds like when I say Leonard Bernstein or the Barbara Walters, who was an anchor person on the news, was another person who was name checked in the Tom Wolfe thing. Now, these are people who you could say earned their position, right? And, first of all, they're not Elon Musk style. They're not trillionaires, right? They're not Ellisons who can just buy companies the way the rest of us might buy a candy bar.
Right.
I mean, they're not like that at all. They may have a nice apartment, and Leonard Bernstein clearly had a nice apartment, but that's not the same thing at all as, these great fortunes. Now, I don't want to give the impression that the United States is a meritocracy. That is where people, get what they deserve on the basis of hard work and competence, because Lord knows the majority of people who work hard and have lots of skills do not rise to become orchestra conductors or, anchors of TV shows. And, I'm not saying that the system is fair, but they are systematically occluding the deeper unfairness, which goes with large fortunes and the incredible unfairness. I mean, a friend of mine recently did an analysis of how much taxpayer money went into the creation of Elon Musk's fortune. People need to know that, right? I mean, this is very, very far from him being an innovator. I mean, we paid into, that to make that fortune. And this is the case for an awful lot of the fortunes out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the many interesting things in the book as well is that you highlight how disingenuous this argument is, which we encounter every day when somebody like Trump or Musk is considered a man of the people, and the kids that are protesting at a university are considered elite and completely divorced from reality. So just my last question about protests is that why do these protests matter? How do you see the place of protesting in the grand scheme of democratic politics? So shouldn't just democratic, I mean, there is always this kind of argument that ultimately, the way you make change in a democratic society is in the polls. You just go and vote. And that protesting is just a kind of, it's a exhibitionist style politics that have very little change, or that lead to very little change. How do you see the importance of protesting in democratic politics?
Well, if I'm ever tempted again to be cynical about protests, the fact that banner went up in October, I think, 2024 in Gaza. Thank you, Colombia. No, sorry, not in, sorry, in the spring, not in October, in April. If there are people in Gaza who are paying attention to the Colombia encampments and feel at least a little bit encouraged under abominable conditions, I'm not going to forget that. If I were capable, if I had the competence to answer in a sociological way, I suppose I would be in some other field. But what I personally feel is there are mysterious subterranean channels, so that, for example, what happened in Egypt in 2011,
yeah,
and the inspiration that gave to Spain and to New York to Occupy Wall Street. Occupy Wall Street absolutely refused to make any demands of the American government. It did not want to treat the American government as a legitimate interlocutor of its protest. And I had mixed feelings about that at the time, more negative feelings than not. But in any case, that's what it was. Well, I don't think that Bernie Sanders' campaign in 2016, which is absolutely treating the legislative process as legitimate, is possible. That I don't think he gets the kind of support that he got in 2016, where it required the intervention of the leaders of the Democratic Party to head him off, because otherwise there was a pretty good chance he was going to be the Democratic nominee. Subterranean channels lead from 2011 and Occupy Wall Street and all the other Occupies into the Bernie Sanders campaign. Now, that's not to say that everything has to take the form of a presidential campaign or getting new people elected in Congress. But again, I'm still living in the glow of Mahmoud Mamdani being elected mayor of New York. Who would have seen that coming? He had 1% before he declared. He was not a known quantity. Mm-hmm. And, he took positions that a lot of people thought would just count him out completely. Anyway, I'm a believer that given that the odds of violent revolution succeeding in this country are not good, I don't know how I would feel about violent revolution if the odds were better, but given that it's not really on the agenda, I don't really have to think about it very hard. I do think about the legislative process, and I do think about what can be done by well-intentioned people, even a minority of them, who are well-placed. So I think protest has a very, very large part in that, for better, for worse. I went to one of the No Kings protests, and to my mind, there was not enough mention of Palestine. That is, the protest, too many of the people who went to the protest were simply anti-Trump and were forgetting that, after all, Gaza, the Biden administration was involved, before Trump was. Mm-hmm. And that what we need is obviously a radical change in the Democratic Party, not just getting rid of Trump. So ideally, you would want to see the people who are helping to form these and organize these protests are thinking politically a couple of steps ahead, and not just aiming at the most proximate target, although the Republicans do make a very good proximate target.
Yeah. Bruce, at the end of every interview, we ask about vital signs. It's the name of our podcast, and we think about vital signs in two ways. One, things that we pay attention to, what are the things that you pay attention to or you keep an eye on to understand or to see the measure of the politics at this point, whether in relation to Palestine, to protests, to a change in U.S. domestic politics. So what are the vital signs that you're paying attention to?
I like the concept of vitality because vitality adds something very important to merely kind of moral righteousness. It's fine to feel that you have moral right on your side, but what you really, really want is for the vehicles of moral righteousness to have vitality. It seems to me that going into the midterm elections this year, there are real signs of vitality in progressive alternatives to the mainstream Democratic Party. So I spend a certain amount of time feeling that. Granted, I'm also feeling as a New Yorker, and I will put a timestamp on this moment and say, on the one hand, Zohran Mamdani, who is an absolutely brilliant mayor, and on the other hand, the New York Knicks, who are a game away from winning a championship for the first time since 1973.
I'm a Boston sports fan. I got off the boat, for lack of a better word, in Boston, and so
Look, the Celtics are a great team. I don't know why they didn't do better this year. I expected them to do better.
I know, me too.
I would not have been surprised to see them in the final.
Yeah, maybe next year then.
Maybe next year.
Yeah. The other way we think about vital signs is to think about signs as almost like road signs, directions to go. So where are the directions that you think we should be moving in our progressive politics today? What are the directions that are important for us to move into?
Well, immediately we have to throw out the leadership of the Democratic Party, beginning with Chuck Schumer. So kind of litmus test for a candidate that I would have even any enthusiasm about would be, I want to see Chuck Schumer gone. The Democratic Party needs more leadership, and it needs a leadership that is going to pay attention to the things we've been talking about. And there are, I think, signs of a lot of people wanting that and not falling for the logic that says, if we want to flip the House, if we want to flip the Senate, we need moderate candidates. And it's the Chuck Schumers of the Democratic Party who will be our guides toward doing that. I just don't think we can be contented with that. I think that a lot of people will not show up to vote if they think that that's all that's involved. So yeah, that's the signpost for me. Mm-hmm. Throw out the leadership of the Democratic Party.
Bruce, thank you so much for taking the time and sitting with us. This has been a pleasure as always. Really, really grateful for your time. Thank you so much.
I enjoyed it very much, and I will look forward to your various podcasts as soon as they're available.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. I hope you learned as much as I did. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and make sure to join our Patreon for exclusive content that you don't want to miss. The conversation continues on the Vital Signs Substack, Instagram, and Facebook page. Let us know your thoughts in the comments and any impact this conversation may have on your thinking. See you next time.